Namaste, namaskar, assalamu alaikum, bonjour, and of course, g'day, mates. To answer Vijay's question, I didn't have a lot to do with it. I think there's a lot smarter people than I around. Before I start my presentation, I want to congratulate Pravin and his team at the India Pulses and Grains Association. What a fantastic convention, Conclave, and of course as a young man growing up, I can see Bimal nodding there. A conclave to me as a young Catholic growing up in Australia was where a group of cardinals got together to lock themselves in a room until they'd made a decision on the new Pope. I'm assuming the conclave concept is that we're all going to lock all the doors and we're going to stay here until we get some decent prices going forward. So I think it's the same concept. Sadaka's nodding. Ladies and gentlemen, before I get into it, and I'll be able to belt through my slides reasonably quickly, but I guess in the past I've been here less than 24 hours and I've made some fairly key observations, I think. And last night's presentation, one of the things that hit me across the face was the concerning statistics about a decline in real pulse consumption in India. Now, to every one of us here, that should be a major concern, whether you're an Indian trader, an importer, or an Australian exporter, Canadian or American. Those statistics are very powerful and we need to work out what the hell's going on. The other thing from a supply-oriented country, an exporting country, Australia, there's some key messages there. We have new and emerging and committed competition. We've heard the gentleman from Malawi speak earlier. There is a lot happening in the African continent, and I think we need to respect that. If we don't respect that, then we're going to get our backsides kicked very sharply. We've also seen over many years, as I've been an observer of what's been happening in India, we have had lots of talking of the talk by the Indian government. We seem to be getting a little bit of the walking of the talk now with their renewed commitment and enthusiasm for DESI or local production. This is also of something that we need to take note of. And I guess as Chairman of Pulse Australia, one of the key things that I think we do exceptionally well in Australia is technology transfer. The issue for us is whether we have some applicability as a local organisation, say along with, say, Pulse Canada, whether we have a role to play in transferring technology, our knowledge, in terms of yield enhancement locally, and whether there's a role to be working collegiately in areas such as bioscience, and whether we start talking about genetic modification in the area of pulses. So I guess these are just things we want to think about. The other thing that's happened in the last 10 years is the capacity of the Australian, the Canadian and the American farmer, and I think that more recently, the Indian farmer to hold product off the market. It's making it hard for traders to trade and hold margins because there is this dynamic of high-quality storage in our local countries and farmers with real means and real intent to hold product off the market. That's impacting liquidity. The final point I guess I want us to think about today is that we've heard about the concerns that you all have about transportation and logistics in North America. We've all heard Jeff almost concede defeat in terms of getting product to the export points, and we know Canada already has. Ladies and gentlemen, Australia is open for business, and we have no such logistical constraints. Come to us, we'll serve you. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've come from as an industry. 25 years ago, the Australian industry was very immature. There was no real linkage in the supply chain. It was extremely ad hoc. We didn't even have national standards. Our quality was all over the place. Farmers didn't know how to produce pulses effectively, efficiently. The supply chain didn't know how to store them. And in fact, many of our grain handling systems in Australia are also, and I see Meta sitting there, so this is a plug for GrainCorp. GrainCorp is, ladies and gentlemen, the largest dal maker in Australia. Sorry, Meta. Because our technology was all based around cereal grain storage, so we did a lot of damage in moving materials. I talk a little bit about the grain industry doesn't understand science. Pulses are a special crop, and we need to respect Mother Nature in her endeavours to craft the output we have, and traders and particularly importers don't fully appreciate some of the very, very difficult conditions we have in Australia, particularly right now, and I'll talk a little bit about that through the presentation. The Australian pulse crop is valuable to the Australian economy. It's over $1 billion today, and we continue to densify value on farm. We are producing those crops which mean more to a farmer's bottom line than ever before. So we have reduced our production of lupins, which was largely a feed grain, and that's being used in the feed ingredient business in Asia and, of course, throughout parts of Australia. And we're moving into more chickpeas, faba beans, lentils and the albus lupin. So right now we have a highly integrated pulse industry in Australia, I think led capably by the team at Pulse Australia, on the ground men and women who are working tirelessly to improve the lot of the farmer and indeed the whole supply chain. We identify roadblocks, and in Australia we have many. We knock them down as we get to them. So it's a much more integrated supply chain today. We care about what we're producing. Our focus is on quality. Our focus is on making sure the genetics reflect the end market requirements. Our plant breeders are working very closely with our exporters and importers in countries to make sure that the products that are coming out of the breeding programs make sense. I guess this is the chart that we like to put up, or I like to put up, and talks about where we think India might go. I've got some real concerns about the validity of this chart into the future. If in fact pulse consumption is in decline, then we need to revisit the data behind this sort of material. But on the broad sweep, we have a good and deep market in the Indian subcontinent, and we need to be well aware of where it's going into the future, particularly as it becomes more economically viable and sustainable. We see the impact in the last 6 or 12 months or so of Indian foreign exchange. Don't worry about the what looks like broken glass there, but it just goes to show you that the impact of that currency has been quite substantial in terms of deflating real CIF prices in India, as we've seen that currency spike. The other thing that's important, I think, to note, and I follow fairly closely the price relativities of key underlying commodities, and you'll see the linear graph, the linear line right down the bottom, which is the red one, which talks about peas in relationship to Chicago wheat. We continue to see the capacity of yellow peas to grow on wheat in terms of real price spread. So we're sitting there about $100 today over US Chicago, and I think we continue to see real strength in that yellow pea market. On the Desi market, we've seen that market as high as $400 over yellow peas, and more recently we're getting down to about $140 spread between Desis and yellows. So the market has been telling us it wanted more Desi chickpeas. Well, ladies and gentlemen, 2 years ago we produced 850,000 tonnes of Desi chickpeas in Australia. So we responded to those market signals you can see there in the sort of April to December 2011, 2012. So, you know, the markets will move production, and I was talking to Rob Brearley before I got up here, and he said the governments can do a lot with minimum support prices, but ultimately it is indeed price that moves acres from one product into another. The key bit of this slide is just how well our logistics task moved last year. At the end of 2012, we produced about 850,000 tonnes of Desi chickpeas. I think by the end of the following February or March, we had moved about 400,000 tonnes of that product into India. Bangladesh was a major player also last year, about 200,000 tonnes. So not only did we produce a big crop, but we also moved it very, very efficiently. Again, a plug for the Australian logistics capacity. Last year, just in summary of previous year, Desi chickpea yields were much lower, and therefore our output much, much lower than the previous year. Kabuli chickpeas were a little bit better. Faba beans are about on par, although Northern Australia suffered terribly with dry conditions as we led into harvest. Dun peas were slightly better than average. Most of the dun peas, you will have seen, there hasn't been a lot of capacity to export large volumes of dun peas from Australia because of the demand for feed protein. So the dun peas work exceptionally well into to chicken rations, and we saw many of the stock feed companies in southern Australia very aggressively pursue peas leading up to and during and post-harvest. Lentils, good conditions throughout most of the growing season saw us above average, or certainly above the previous year's output in terms of product, and quality seems to be very, very good as well. We had a couple of frost events which scared us a little bit, but in the end wasn't a great challenge. Lupin output a little bit bigger, and that's a feed product. That's in Western Australia. Western Australia had a reasonable finish, in fact probably near record cropping, record outputs over there, but it's not a big consequence for these markets. The mung bean production in Australia this year will be less than probably 10,000 tonnes, talking to Dale Reeves last night. So if you're thinking about buying cheap Australian green mung beans, there's going to be limited scope because we have an extremely small crop, and when I show you a slide you'll see why. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Australia, and it is a land of milk and honey sometimes, but right now you can see the eastern portion of our continent, the driest continent on Earth, is extremely dry. And this is, obviously we're not at record levels. In the eastern and northern portion of our grain cropping regions, we rely on subsoil moisture, not unlike the monsoon replenished soils of northern India. The monsoon has failed in Australia. In fact, 2 years running in many areas, the monsoon has failed. So we have extremely dry soils in the majority of our desi chickpea growing area. The area that's extreme right of the screen there, which is deeply red, is by and large where we're growing desi chickpeas. And we have no profile moisture in 85 to 90% of that particular region. We're moving into our time of our year where we get less rainfall. So if we do get some rainfall, farmers are more likely than not to plant cereals than pulses. So if you're looking to have a big Australian desi chickpea crop come November, December this year, then today that wouldn't be my call. We have some huge problems with drought in northern Australia. This is just a couple of shots that were taken in the northwestern portion of New South Wales. The little white things that you can see in a line there, anybody like to guess what they are? They're sheep. We have a few sheep left. Now they're all gathered around a trail of grain that's been dropped out of the back of a truck, and you can see there is no feed in those paddocks, and ladies and gentlemen, much of northern Australia looks like that. You can see very little feed and a lot of hand feeding going on. So when I say to you we have some problems in the agricultural regions of northern Australia, we have some big problems. Really just to wrap up, I mean you'll get this presentation in your pack I'm guessing, but I want to just revisit what I said at the start. We need seriously within IPGA and CISLs, Pulse Canada and Pulse Australia to fundamentally review the data on consumption trends of pulses in the Indian sub, I guess in India more particularly. We have to respect the new and growing competition that is seeking to supply markets like the Indian subcontinent. We have to understand the true commitment the Indian government has to local or desi production of pulses, and we need to maybe discuss the technology transfer to see whether there is something in it for all to work together on this. We have to understand that the Australian farmer has a significant capacity to carry product. He is not in a position where he is forced to sell, and once again, ladies and gentlemen, you can rely on Australia to get the product to you when you want it.